What's up, everyone? This is Greg with SportsRehabExpert.com. Today we're going to be getting into what's the best squat depth for you. Should you squat to parallel? Should you partial squat? Should you squat ass to grass? What's the best for your knee, hip, ankle joint health? And what are we seeing from an observation standpoint, from a longevity standpoint? Now, in one camp, we have individuals who say you should squat ass to grass all the way down because that's what you were born with, right? That was your birthright. You could do it as a baby. You could squat all the way down, but yet you had a head that was significantly larger in proportion to your body than what you do now currently as a fully grown human being. In another camp, we have squat to parallel or squat to 90 degrees because this is optimal for joint health. There's a big myth. Let's dispel that one. And third and finally, we have a partial range of motion squat. And these are the individuals who say, well, in sports and in life, we don't actually usually go down all the way into a deep squat. We perform most of our activities at around 30 to 45 degrees of knee bend. So that's where we need to get the strongest. Plus, it leads to sports performance gains, right? So there's three conflicting camps. Which one's right? Are they all right? Are they all wrong? What should you do about it? So let's start with first and foremost what the research is saying. I realize there's hundreds of articles out there on this concept. Many of them are not done well. Many of them also are very biased in what the outcome is that they're searching for. So what are their measurements looking at? And then again, it's a research study, so it has to be very specific into what outcome it's searching for, what it's testing for. So to a certain extent, we need to extrapolate a lot of different research articles and look at it holistically and piece together different research articles to give us a better picture of what the best outcomes or what the best train of thought from a programming standpoint looks like for an individual for health and performance, long-term longevity, but then also from a sports performance or athletic lifestyle performance standpoint too, because people are interested in that. So the first study we're going to look at is the analysis of load on the knee joint and vertebral column with changes in squat depth and weighted load. Now, I bring this article up first because it's looking at a lot of different studies and extrapolating them and putting them all together in one research article for you specifically. This article itself looks at 164 other articles on this specific topic. And what they've found through all these different articles that I've done, again, 164 articles were looked at here, the highest amount of retropatellar, that is the force behind your kneecap, the highest amount of force of behind the kneecap being placed on the knee occurs at 90 degrees. So from a joint standpoint, from purely a compression standpoint, from a physics standpoint, 90 degrees is actually the least optimal position to be hanging out in. What do we do all day? We sit at 90 degrees, squat to 90 degrees, because we're told that's right from a physics standpoint, which is clearly not based upon research, and the fact that it provides the most compression to the knee joint at 90 degrees. Now, just to play devil's advocate, we need to understand that compression isn't necessarily a bad thing when dosed appropriately. So if we look at a different pathology altogether, such as osteoporosis or osteopenia, weakening of the bones, we actually want compression. We want weight-bearing exercises because that stimulates growth and overturn of the cellular matrix formed into the bone itself to build a more dense bone structure to help limit osteopenia or potentially reverse osteopenia and limit the effects of osteoporosis. So from a bone and joint health standpoint, compression is a good thing, but we have to also keep in mind that the dosage of that is extremely important. Too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. The poison isn't necessarily in the substance itself, it's in the dosage of the substance that was given to the individual. Water is a healthy thing, but if you consume too much of it too quickly, that is a poison and could potentially lead to death. So it doesn't mean just because something is good, if it's not dosed appropriately, it doesn't mean it's a good thing. Compression isn't bad. A lot of people associate compression with arthritis. We need compression to have strong and healthy joints, but we have to do it from a correct dosage standpoint. And if everything you're doing in life is just to 90 degrees, you're squatting to 90 degrees, you're lunging to 90 degrees, you're deadlifting at 90-degree angles at your knee and your hip joint, or around that region, and you sit all day long at 90 degrees. This is a high amount of dosage in that position that provides a compressive force. So done over a long period of time, maybe that's not the best thing for you. Conversely to this is a deep squat, which actually from a joint perspective decreases the amount of force at the knee. And this is due to what I've commonly referred to in other videos and what's commonly referred to in the research and in this research article itself is the wrapping effect. This is because your knee is bending so far that extra pressure is being placed actually on the musculature because your calf and your hamstrings are actually touching one another. And this leads to more compression and arresting compression on soft tissue of the back of the knee joint and leads to a decompressive force in the front of your knee or the retropatellar area behind your kneecap. Because all of the fluid pressure in that joint is shifted forward, so it creates an expansive mechanism in the front of the joint. And that is not just theory. Again, this is looked at through 164 articles again, and a comprehensive overview of those 164 articles. And the conclusion of those findings are that concerns about degenerative changes in the tendon femoral complex and the apparent risk of chondromalacia or osteoarthritis or osteochondritis in deep squats is unfounded. Looking at these 164 articles, the general overview of the same load done into a deep ass to grass squat compared to a half or quarter squat, comparatively the half and quarter squat will favor degenerative changes at the knee joint due to the supramaximal loads. Now again, I would like to qualify that a little bit, as opposed to just saying half and quarter squats are bad. I would like to say that done in the correct dosage, they may be a beneficial thing from a sports performance standpoint when we're looking at specific joint angles that are achieved in sport to train more force and more power. More on that thought later. Furthermore, again, we mentioned how compression isn't necessarily a 24/7 bad thing. You need compression. If you never experience compression throughout your life, your bones are going to develop arthritic changes. You are going to get osteopenia. You're going to get osteoporosis if you never weight bear. Another completely different scenario of this is they found that astronauts, when they come back from space, that their bones have weakened simply because they don't have to deal with gravity. So again, compression is necessary for a healthy joint, for a healthy bone. It's just a matter of the dosage. So we have to quantify that as opposed to just saying it's 100% bad just because the research says it's bad or worse than the other. But the research is saying that a full depth squat is better. Now, the second article that we're going to look at is titled "Full Squat Produces Greater Neuromuscular and Functional Adaptations and Lower Pain Than Partial Squats and Prolonged Resistance Training." And what this article found was that half squats produced no incremental neuromuscular and functional performance. It was also the only group. They looked at half squats, parallel squats, and full depth ass to grass squats. Half squats were the only group that reported an increase in pain level and an increase in their functional disability level. It doesn't mean they're disabled, it just means that they didn't feel like they were comfortable performing as many daily activities as usual, or they reported more soreness while doing these type of activities of daily living. Whereas if you looked at a full depth ass to grass squat, they actually achieved higher levels of functional performance and decreasing levels of pain and stiffness. Now I think, again, that this is telling, and it jumps off of the previous study that we did too, is that if you just do partial or half squats, it generally doesn't lead to a decrease in pain and stiffness. On the contrary, it actually leads to increases in pain and stiffness when done excessively over a long period of time. Whereas if you go through a full range of motion squat, generally that person feels better and that person, according to this research article, gets stronger. Now, there are other articles out there that will argue the fact that a partial or a half squat will make somebody stronger. I have seen those articles out there, but generally those articles are specific to the task at hand, meaning they get better at half squats by doing half squats. Whereas if you look at full depth squat studies, the individual gets stronger through the full range. So what is your goal? What is your intention? Is your intention to get really, really strong at half squats? What's the benefit of that? We already know a lot of research is showing that it increases pain and stiffness. And does it really increase your performance that much more? Because again, a full depth squat also increases your strength and performance through a full range of motion. So that means that half squat range of motion is also going to be strengthened and improved while doing a full depth squat. And intuitively, this makes sense, right? So if I took two lifters and we compared the two world-class lifters, let's just say an individual who power lifts and they squat, their squat looks like this, and they can lift, let's just say 500 pounds is an arbitrary number. An individual who can half squat or partial squat a 500 pound with the form that looks like this, do you think that they can again squat those 500 pounds or even 400 pounds at a full depth squat that looks like this? Now, I would even argue that the prior person, they may not even be able to get in this position in the first place. So it might be an individual who can squat 500 pounds half squat can't even do a full depth squat. Whereas if you get somebody who can full depth squat 300 pounds, I would actually make the argument that if you had them and forced them to do a half squat, they may be able to get up to 500 pounds simply by being able to do a full depth 300 pound squat. They're going to be much stronger in the half squat, or at least have a better chance of completing that lift in the half squat. Whereas you can't say the converse of that. You can't say someone who can half squat a 300 pound half squat, you would not say that they could do a 300 pound full depth squat. See what I'm saying? There's a differences here, which should lead you to the conclusion that being able to train and squat through a full range of motion and develop squat numbers through a full depth is actually more advantageous than doing partial range of motion squats, or even squatting to parallel in that instance. In kind of a middle ground between the two, but in my opinion, it's the full depth squat that is king. Finally, the last research article that we're going to look at is titled "The Effect of Knee Position and Hip and Knee Torques During a Barbell Squat." Now, this study looks at the effects of the type of squat that an individual does. A lot of people will, quote unquote, hinge their squat or push their butt back and their shins remain fairly vertical. Whereas a true squat, a true ass to grass squat, to be able to get down all the way, what is required in that position is a more vertical torso, and the knees also have to go forward. Usually the shin angle and the torso angle are in parallel, if not the shin angle even more forward than the torso angle, as opposed to the other way around, where the torso angle is the individual takes a big bow or hinges forward at their waist, and their shin remains fairly vertical the entire time. And what they found with the individual who hinges or uses that butt back, knee back strategy actually places a significant amount of increased force at their hip joint, or an increased torque at their hip joint. And this increase of torque to the hip is not in the same relationship of the increased amount of torque placed at the knee. So yes, as your knee goes forward over top of the shin, there's going to be an increased amount of demand through the patellar tendon and through the knee joint itself to be able to accept load, because the shin and the knee are moving forward. So there's going to be an increased amount of torque at that position. But again, take in mind that there's going to be the wrapping effect if you can get into that position that's going to help decrease some of that compressive force in that position. The torque's still going to be higher because the knee is out in front of the foot. But again, the compressive load is going to be reduced because of that wrapping effect in that full range of motion squat. So whereas at the hip, none of this wrapping effect is going to occur. At the hip, if you restrict your squat and restrict the knees forward and you sit your butt way back and the knees go back or the shins stay vertical, you're going to have an increasing amount of torque at the hip that's more significant than the knees going forward. This relationship is not one-to-one. They are not equal, which is why a sit your butt back squat and keep your shins vertical squat is not advantageous for an individual to train. And I would argue it's not even useful for a period of time if someone's experiencing pain with their knees forward. If they can't get their knees forward over top of if they can't get a forward shin angle and their knees over top of their feet, then you need to reduce the load of the squat so that you don't continually modify the squat over a course of period of time. What we've seen from all these research articles that I've just shown you here is that the more you modify the squat and the less you make it a true ass to grass squat, the more and more pain, stiffness is a result of that. So you need to achieve a level that you're currently capable of doing through a full depth squat, and your joints, your tissues are going to be much more healthier and happier from it, as well as you're going to increase your performance over the long haul because you're feeling better and because you're able to train a little bit more aggressively because your tissue is feeling better by training full depth squats. But again, many people, because lifestyle and prior training habits, are not able to achieve a full depth squat, whether it's from a knee loading standpoint or a knee tolerance standpoint or an ankle range of motion standpoint. They're going to have to use some type of assist to get down in there, whether that's the placement of the weight or the implement that you use being in the front, such as a goblet squat, to create a counterbalance as opposed to using a back squat, which is going to be harder to maintain an upright torso in a back squat. So using a goblet squat is going to be advantageous there. Furthermore, putting somebody on a slant board is going to be useful because it's going to take a little bit of that ankle range of motion out of the equation. It's also going to give you a little bit of leverage to keep your torso upright because of the counterbalance, because of the foot being plantar flexed. This will allow the individual to sit down into a normal ass to grass squat position. So using heels elevation is not a bad thing. A lot of people will say, well, your ankle range of motion isn't necessarily being trained. Yeah, but again, all these relationships of different joints aren't necessarily equal. I would much rather continue working on developing my ankle range of motion with other exercises and not put a significant amount of more stress on my knees or hips simply because my ankles aren't super flexible and still squat. So if your ankles are limited, work on other things that develop ankle range of motion and realize that that might take a long period of time for you to get an ankle range of motion that helps you achieve a deep squat position. And also just structure of individuals, leg length and torso length discrepancies, how tall someone is. That's all going to play a role with how easy someone can get down deep into a deep squat. Because again, the knock against the argument that you were born with the ability to squat deep, that individual, it's a baby. The head is significantly larger than the rest of the body. So right there in and of itself, it creates a counterbalance to be able to sit down deep into the squat. So the size of a baby's head is very similar to someone doing a front-loaded goblet squat and placing more load in the front of their body. It gives you a counterbalance to sit down deeper into your squat. So again, that argument isn't necessarily valid for a fully grown human being, which is why it's completely okay to use front-loaded squats and completely okay to use as much heels elevation as necessary for you to achieve a full depth squat. And then finally, keep in mind that because likely your lifestyle and your prior training habits did not have you going through a full range of motion, you're going to have to put your ego aside, which is extremely difficult for some people, to be able to squat lower. Because again, if you can squat 300 pounds through a partial or half squat range of motion, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to squat that 300 pounds through a full depth range of motion. Doesn't mean you can even do it body weight. Whereas the reverse of that, if you can do a 300-pound full depth squat, you 100% certainly can do a 300-pound half squat. So it makes sense to develop the full depth squat first and foremost, and then if you want to, from a sports performance standpoint, do small periods of time of partial squats or limited range of motion squats to build a specific joint angle strength to improve that individual's performance. Squat ass to grass before you jump all the way up. You just go through a partial dip. So that's where the argument becomes. But this is why individuals who just train partial range of motion squats all the time and then try to jump high get hurt all the time, is because the training itself didn't allow them to be resilient enough to withstand all the plyometrics done at that shortened range of motion joint angle. So to summarize, you're looking at making sure you can full depth squat first and foremost, and gradually build that up and start wherever you have to currently start. And that may be just body weight with the heels elevated. It may be body weight with the heels elevated and using hand support so you can get down through that full range of motion. And then you might find other exercises such as a split squat that helps take you through that full range of motion and increase the amount of exposure so you can develop that capacity over time. And it's going to require that you put your ego aside to be able to not feel like you need to maximize the weight. But then again, that could be a very useful thing for your health and longevity in your sport. Because again, if someone can squat 300 pounds full depth, I guarantee you they can squat 300 pounds half. But likely they can also increase the weight there and do the half squat with, I'm just throwing numbers out there, but they probably could do a 350-pound half squat. Maybe they could do a 400-pound half squat. Very slight chance, maybe they could even do a 500-pound half squat because they first developed the capacity to do a 300-pound full depth squat. You can't say the reverse of that. You can't say a 500-pound half squat is capable of achieving a 500-pound full depth squat, nor can you say with much confidence that that person could achieve a 300-pound full depth squat. In a lot of instances, they can't even perform a bodyweight full depth squat. So again, intuitively make the decision yourself. What makes sense? I've given and laid out all the research for you here to back up my choice of full depth squats, but I also listed reasoning behind why I continue to support that decision. So you can make your own educated decision based upon the research and based upon what just intuitively makes sense. Drop it in the comments below if you have any questions, what you thought about this analysis, and anything you'd like us to analyze further from a training perspective, from an injury perspective in the future, so we can keep bringing you more educational videos that are as useful for you to continue training and living that active lifestyle that you enjoy doing. We'll be back with another video soon, so be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for that next video when it comes out. Like and share any video that you may find helpful, and share this with somebody who thinks that partial squats are the way to go.